Just to introduce myself, my name is Louise Regan. I am a member of the National Education Union. I'm a member of the National Executive and I chair our International Committee. I've been asked to chair this rally this evening, it is a real privilege for me to do. So tonight's meeting is called No War on Venezuela. It's been called because obviously we are deeply alarmed by the growing threat of a Trump-led war on Venezuela. We know that many in this kind of country want to demonstrate their opposition to such a war, and we're very pleased, as I say, that in just a few days, over 400 people have registered to come and listen to what they can do to get involved. As we saw just a few days ago with the seizure of a Venezuelan oil tanker, Donald Trump is stepping up aggression against Venezuela and also in the wider region. In recent weeks, a huge US naval force, including warships, bombers, and thousands of troops, has been deployed to the Caribbean off Venezuela's coast. And Trump has publicly confirmed that he has authorized the CIA to conduct covert operations inside Venezuela. There's already been US strikes on Venezuelan small boats under the pretext of a so-called war on drugs, and this has already killed dozens of civilians. And now Trump has ominously warned that the land is going to be next. Tonight's rally is just the beginning of a series of actions which I think lots of us here will want to get involved in. But I would say right at the start of this rally, please do make sure you sign the statement, No War on Venezuela, that Venezuela Solidarity Campaign has put out. It already has a significant number of signatures, but we really do need people to make sure they have signed that statement and share it widely with your contacts. Encourage them to sign that. And I think that statement will be posted regularly in the chat during this evening. So thank you to all of you that have taken the time out this evening to come and join us. We have a fantastic range of speakers over this evening. They're all going to speak for 4 to 5 minutes. Really knowledgeable people in the room to talk about the current situation and what more you can be doing. So because we have so many speakers, without further ado, I'm going to move on to introduce our first speaker, who is Richard Burgon MP for Leeds East, a long-standing supporter of progressive movements in Latin America, but across the world, actually. You know, Richard is a real advocate for peace, for justice, globally. So it's a real honour to introduce you, Richard, and I'm really grateful for you giving up time to talk to us this evening.
So much, Louise, and I want to thank all the organisers for this emergency meeting tonight. We're in a very dangerous moment, so we need to speak out loudly against a new era of Trump-led wars in Latin America. Now, Trump has amassed the largest military build-up in the Caribbean in decades, just off Venezuela, and that's why we're meeting, including the largest warship ever constructed, and including 15,000 US troops in the region. We've seen illicit killings with the bombing of small boats. We've seen the seizure of a Venezuelan oil tanker, and Trump is now threatening land attacks. It could not be more serious. So that's the context in which we meet tonight. The threat against Venezuela is clearly very real, but we also need to see this as just a first step in Trump's wider strategy. Trump's national security strategy, published last week, has sparked real alarm all across the world, and quite rightly so. In Europe, he made clear that the plan was to install far-right parties in power here, but one region was in his crosshairs more than any other, and that's Latin America. The strategy was explicit. Latin America will once again become the United States' backyard. For Trump, this area of 700 million people will be treated as nothing more than a US colony. Trump's strategy says the USA will, and I quote, reassert and enforce the Monroe Doctrine to restore American preeminence in the Western Hemisphere. It talks of control over its geography, control over its resources, and control over its security. This is not just a grab of Venezuela's oil, the largest reserves in the world. It's a power grab to control the whole region. Now, that would be a total reversal of the last quarter of a century of Latin American history, because in the 21st century, as we know, a whole series of governments known as the Pink Tide were elected with a focus on having sovereignty over their national resources, be that oil, rare minerals, or gold, and using these to invest in healthcare, in education, and in public services. They were focused on integration, trading with each other for mutual benefits, and not just being dominated by the United States. And they focused on trade with other parts of the world, from Europe to Africa to China. Now, none of this is acceptable to Trump. That's what Trump means when he says he wants to put an end to this. He wants to remove any barrier to US domination and US control. Now, the people of Latin America, just like the people all over the world, do not want to be controlled in the interest of a superpower. So when Trump says domination is his aim, we have to be very alarmed at what could follow. Now, I'm deeply worried that the Trump agenda will have to be imposed by military interventions, by the installation of puppet governments, and by a rolling back of democratic freedoms and restrictions of basic human rights. Let's remember what the United States did during the 1970s and the 1980s with Plan Condor. Then US-backed military dictatorships oversaw the murder and torture of many tens of thousands of political opponents. And that was a key step in imposing economic control and the neoliberal economic experiments that Thatcher and Reagan then brought here. So I think what we are on the verge of is a new, updated Operation Condor, with all that follows from that. So in conclusion, as there are many speakers tonight, the danger is real. We need to say clearly no to war on Venezuela and no to a new era of US wars in Latin America. And our task now is to build the widest possible movement in our trade unions, in our communities, in our campaigns, and our parliament to stop this war before it begins. I've put down a parliamentary motion on this today, and you can count on me to join you all in building the widest possible movement for peace, for sovereignty, and for the rights of all peoples in Latin America to determine their own future. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Richard. That was really comprehensive, but also really practical points for us to take away. So I really appreciate that. And it's really good to hear that you are already taking practical action within Parliament, as you consistently do. So thanks for all that you and others in this room continue to do, actually. Our next speaker is from the US. It's Francesca Emanuele. She's from the Center for Economic and Policy Research and has been playing a central role in challenging Trump's drive to war in the US. So a really important voice for us to hear. We're really pleased that you are able to join us, Francesca. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm not from the US, I'm from Peru, but I'm speaking from Washington, D.C., the capital of the country that has spent more than 20 years, my entire adult life, trying to overthrow the government of Venezuela, a country with the largest oil reserves in the world, as you know. In these more than 2 decades, the U.S. has remained steadfast in its objective of regime change in Venezuela. The U.S. has imposed excruciating sanctions designed to push the Venezuelan state towards collapse. These measures have produced widespread hunger, caused tens of thousands of deaths due to lack of access to food and medicine, and helped trigger the largest migration crisis in modern Latin American history, with around 8 million Venezuelans forced to leave the country over the past 10 years. But since September, we have entered a new phase, one that I believe is the most dangerous and violent so far. We are at the moment of maximum pressure that is placing the Venezuelan population and all of Latin America and the Caribbean before the very real possibility of a forever war. Think of Afghanistan, a war that lasted 20 years. Think of Libya, which remains embroiled in violent chaos ever since the NATO intervention there. Think of Iraq, which the US invaded in 2003 under the false pretext of weapons of mass destruction. The strategy of justifying military action through lies is not new. What has changed is the pretext. Today, the lie is framed as the fight against narco-terrorism. The US labels Nicolás Maduro as the leader of two fictitious drug cartels, despite the fact that Venezuela is not a major producer of cocaine, that less than 10% of cocaine transits through Venezuela, according to US data, and that Venezuela does not produce fentanyl. There is no doubt that the US is pursuing regime change in Venezuela. But Venezuela is seen as the first stop, as we heard before. President Trump said it openly last week. He said Colombia would be next. Cuba, Mexico, Nicaragua, and other countries not considered ideological allies are also on the list. The Trump administration wants to reassert a brutal, violent hegemony over what US officials openly call their own backyard. Our countries in Latin America, many which gained independence more than 200 years ago, yet which this administration, by its own admission, still treats as subordinate territories. That is why the US has deployed nearly 20% of its naval power in the Caribbean, where together with operations in the Pacific, it has illegally bombed small boats and carried out extrajudicial killings. The coercive measures that we have seen over the course of this administration, along with tariffs and all kinds of threats, have succeeded in silencing governments across Latin America and the Caribbean, with only few exceptions, such as Colombia. And governments like the UK and countries in Europe, despite their big economic and political power, are not only remaining almost silent, but are actively facilitating US actions. Yesterday, I saw the European Council extended sanctions on Venezuela until 2027, justifying them on the basis of democracy and human rights violation. The Bank of England continues to deny Venezuela access to billions of dollars of sovereign gold reserves that are held in accounts there. Meanwhile, the US, which has killed at least 87 civilians since September and openly threatens to bomb another country, does not ever or now haven't received a firm collective warning from the UK or the European Union. And this hypocrisy of our political leaders is staggering. And I'm going to finish with this. I want to say that fortunately here in the US, at least 70% of the population opposed a military regime change operation against Venezuela. And the US Congress has been responding, introducing measures supported by Democrats and some Republicans that aim to prevent a regime change war. Under the US law, Congress is the only one body with authority to declare war. None of these measures unfortunately have passed, but they have already forced the Trump administration to de-escalate in recent weeks and to publicly admit that it lacks a legal justification to attack Venezuelan territory. This week, the US Congress will vote again a war powers resolution, and our eyes and our efforts are now there. And stopping bombs is urgent, but it's not enough. So economic warfare continues, piracy against Venezuelan tankers, the shutdown of Venezuelan airspace, and an active siege of the country. These two are acts of war. So the question for Europe and for the UK is simple. If military escalation is halted, but collective punishment continues, will your governments remain silent, or will they continue to be complicit? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Francesca. It was very good to hear about the situation there, and certainly to hear about the opposition of the people in the US to what is happening, because we have that same situation here in the UK. Often our population is very against what is happening, but our government continues to do things that we disagree with. So it's very interesting and very informative. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to move on because, as I said earlier, we do have a lot of speakers, but I think they're all really important. So I do want to hear from all of our speakers. So our next speaker is Gawain Little. He's from GFTU. He's the General Secretary. He's also previously chair of the International Committee in the NEU. So, you know, he has a huge amount of experience and has been a long-term campaigner for Latin America. So you're very welcome, Gawain. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks very much, Louise, and I'm really pleased to be here bringing solidarity on behalf of 500,000 affiliated members of the General Federation of Trade Unions. We say very clearly no to Trump's war on Venezuela. With the seizure of the Venezuelan oil tanker, the buildup of troops on warships off the coast of Venezuela, the open green light for the CIA to carry out operations in Venezuela with the threat that the land is next, and of course with the murder of Venezuelan citizens and the attacks we've seen on the small boats, there is a very real chance that we face the escalation to war in Latin America. As we say in a statement that has now been signed by thousands of people, there are deep fears that the US military intervention in Venezuela will be the first step in a wider military escalation by Trump in Latin America. And let's be honest, we know what US intervention in Latin America looks like. We've seen it over decades. We know what US regime change in Latin America looks like. And we know what happens when the US overthrows democratically elected leaders chosen by the people and replaces them with US-backed dictators. We say no to US military intervention, no more Pinochets. We say yes to popular sovereignty and yes to the right of the Venezuelan people to choose their own government. I say I'm proud to speak here as a trade unionist because I believe that this is a trade union issue. Our movement is founded on the principle of solidarity, and that principle cuts across all borders. When working people are under threat of war, sanctions, regime change, it is our duty to stand with them. And we do. We stand with our sisters and brothers in Venezuela and across Latin America. We stand with them for peace against war, for independence against external intervention, and for popular sovereignty against US military intervention. We say no to Trump's war on Venezuela.
Thanks very much, Gawain. Powerful and passionate as always. So we really appreciate you giving up your time and for everything the GFTU is doing in terms of support for this. It is a very critical moment, so we really do appreciate that support. So thank you very much. I've noticed that the statement has been posted again in the chat. So if you haven't signed the statement, a number of our speakers have referred to it now. Please do make sure that your name is on it. Okay, our next speaker is Diane Abbott MP. So it's a real privilege to have you here, Diane. I'm going to hand the floor to you. Thank you very much.
It's a real privilege to be at this very important meeting. As we all know, yesterday in Chile, they elected a fascist government, which puts what is happening in Venezuela absolutely on the front line of progressive politics, because there is going to be a wave of reactionary politics worldwide and in South America unless we rally. The first thing to say is that the United States state has long seen Caribbean and South America as its backyard. And long before Trump became president, the United States state has sought to intervene in the politics of the Caribbean and South America, obviously Castro in Cuba, but also Maurice Bishop in Grenada, and now Venezuela. The US crushing progressive movements in South America has long been a priority for the United States, but for Trump, crushing Venezuela has become its top priority. And let's be clear, this is about regime change and stealing assets. This is what it's about. It's not about, it's not about just challenging progressive movements alone. It's about changing the regime in Venezuela and making that the beginning of rightward shifts across South America. And it is almost tragic that what's happening in Venezuela is not meeting any resistance in Europe and here in the UK, which is what makes this meeting so important. The truth is that Venezuela has the world's largest reserves of heavy crude oil. And although the oil is now an oil exporter, it has a huge deficiency of heavy crude. But as I've said, the project is not just a political one. It's not just an economic one, but it's a political one. Trump is rewriting the Monroe Doctrine to claim that not only is the Caribbean and Latin America the US's backyard, as decades of US politicians before him have claimed, but the countries of Latin America cannot have independent ties to other countries, independent trade, military, diplomatic, even cultural ties. All of this is set out in Trump's new national security documents, and it does represent a fatal step forward from the kind of imperialism we've seen from previous United States governments. So, with what's happening across South America and across the world, really, this is a really vital struggle. We cannot allow Trump to crush Venezuela and move on to crush the rest of the South America and the Caribbean. So we must demand of our government in Britain that we publicly denounce this aggression. Now, we know it's quite difficult for Keir Starmer to breathe a word of criticism of Trump, but we have to make sure he does. Venezuela is on the front line. There are terrible things happening across South America and in Europe. This is a really important rally. And in whatever way, through the trade union movement, the Labour Party itself, through campaigns, we have to put pressure on the British government to stand up on this issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Diane. And again, with Richard and others, there are a few of you there who are constantly fighting for justice, for peace across the globe. And we thank you for all that you continue to do day in, day out, and stand in absolute solidarity with you. So thank you so much for giving up your time this evening. Now, I'm going to call in Jeremy Corbyn MP. I know he has to go quite soon, so he probably needs very little introduction, as didn't Diane or Richard. But Jeremy, we really thank you for taking up the time to come along tonight. We know you're busy, and I know you've got another meeting to get to. So thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Louise, and thank you very much for organising this, and thank all the others that have spoken tonight brilliantly. And a particular thank you to Richard Burgon for the initiative he's taken on the parliamentary motion, which I very happily signed earlier today, because it's important to make these statements. This is a time to stand by Venezuela and stand by any other country in Latin America that is under threat at the present time. The US presence in the South Caribbean is absolutely massive. Huge aircraft carrier, huge numbers of troops involved, and very large number of planes available for them. And the continued killing of people that are in small boats off the coast of Venezuela, and harassment of fishermen in Trinidad and Tobago and other places. Enormous pressure being placed on one Caribbean country after another to provide a US base and a facility there, and the movement of an awful lot of US assets to Puerto Rico recently, which could herald something really, really bad where Venezuela is concerned. The siege of the oil tanker last week was a major move by the US, and it has two effects. One is it obviously deprives Venezuela of the potential income from the sale of oil from that tanker, but it also means that any shipping company will be very reluctant now to anywhere near Venezuela because of the danger of their vessels being impounded by the US as they leave the region. And so it will effectively shut off Venezuela from a great deal of international trade, which obviously a large volume of it comes by sea. So it is an economic strangulation of Venezuela on top of the sanctions that have gone on for years, and on top of the British continued refusal to provide payment to Venezuela for the money that's held in the gold that's held in the Bank of England by the UK. So we see here the continued US policy, the continuation of their strangulation of Venezuela, and for that matter, the continued sanctions against Cuba. But Diane and others have spoken about the new US strategy, which is a intensification and an updating of the Monroe Doctrine into sort of 21st century terms. And quite clearly, they have an agenda of regime change all across Latin America by whatever means they can manage. And yesterday, the results in Chile are obviously deeply disappointing for all of us who wanted to see a left government of some sort in Chile. But for the Communist Party candidate to get 41% of the vote is a very high vote, which indicates a very high level of consciousness amongst the people of Chile, who will not take easily the mass privatization that will follow and the militarization of Chile that will follow by the new government in Chile. And so don't underestimate the stoicism of the people of Chile, of Argentina, of Peru and of Bolivia to stand up against this onward move to the right, which is being promoted by the US. And so it's also important to remember that we need to develop our solidarity with all of the countries in the Caribbean and Latin America. It is Venezuela today. It could be any other tomorrow. I can well recall when the US invaded Grenada in 1983, not because Grenada represented any kind of threat whatsoever to the USA. That was all complete nonsense. It was the threat of the example that the people of the Caribbean could take unto themselves their own future. So instead, what we have is a group of countries heavily indebted to the West, heavily indebted to the extent they cannot develop their own social justice programs, and a threat of military presence if they step out of line. Venezuela stepped out of line a long time ago when it embarked on a course of trying to share the wealth and share the prosperity and develop education, housing, health, and everything else. And so I think we need to show our solidarity at this time. Last week, there was a statement in Parliament in response to an urgent question about the new Trump doctrine. And the British government said at one point they didn't agree with all of it, but couldn't ever bring themselves to say which part of it they didn't agree with. In reality, the UK government is doing what successive governments have done ever since the Second World War, and that is kowtow down to US foreign policy and US foreign policy objectives. And so the campaign with us has to be of solidarity, has to be of recognizing what the dangers of all this are, but also has to be a campaign of education into the reality of what this foreign policy means to the poorest people in often the poorest countries in the world. It's Venezuela at the moment. Others will follow, but there's already the wars going on in the Middle East. There's already, as we just had a discussion on today in Parliament, a massive war going on in Sudan, a war for natural resources, as most of the wars are. And so build the campaign, build the solidarity, and keep talking about it, because none of our media seem to be prepared to analyze what's going on or seriously understand what the change in the US policy is and what the intensification is of Trump's foreign policy agenda. We need to have a strong movement of global solidarity in this country. Let's get to it and build it.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And as always, thank you for all that you continue to do. I don't know how you manage to do as much as you do, not just through the Peace and Justice Project, but through your work in Parliament. You're always where you need to be and always fighting back against injustices, which you have done for your entire lifetime. So thank you for that. And thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us. As has been posted in the chat again, Jeremy has signed the statement, as has Diane and others. So please do make sure you sign that statement. We're going to move on to our next speaker, who is Lindsey German. For people that don't know Lindsey, she's convener of the Stop the War Coalition. She's one of the partners in the Palestine Coalition, has worked tirelessly in justice for the Palestinian people, but also, as I say, is convener of Stop the War and long-time activist who I've known forever and is a fantastic person. So I'll hand over to you, Lindsey.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thanks to everybody who's organised the meeting tonight, particularly to Richard and all the work that's been done, because I think that as I think all the speakers have made very, very clear, we're in an extremely dangerous situation. We're in an extremely dangerous situation in Venezuela, with the constant incursions in terms of bombing boats, in terms of the trying to control airspace, in terms of this huge fleet of American warships that are now in Trinidad and in the Caribbean. So I think from the point of view of Stop the War Coalition, we are very concerned about war with Venezuela from Trump, and that we want to send all our solidarity to the Venezuelan people and to people campaigning in this country over Venezuela. And we will be with you in anything that you organise and campaign to do. I just want to make a couple of points, because people have made so many points already, all of which have been incredibly powerful. But I just want to go back to the Trump doctrine, because it's quite an amazing strategic document, and I think it's worth just, when you read it, it's quite shocking actually. And it says, we want to ensure that the Western Hemisphere remains reasonably stable and well governed enough to prevent mass migration, to prevent we want a hemisphere whose governments cooperate with us against narco-terrorists, which of course is a pretty dubious idea anyway. We want a hemisphere that's free of hostile foreign incursion, obviously excluding Donald Trump's own hostile foreign incursion or ownership of key assets. And we want to ensure our continued access to key strategic locations. In other words, as people have said, and as Trump himself says, this is a restatement of the Monroe Doctrine. It is the idea that America, United States, can do what it wants anywhere in Latin America. And Trump talks about peacemaking, but actually this document tells you that he is preparing for war. And it's war against Venezuela, and if that is the case, it will also be eventually against Cuba, against other countries in Latin America. But it's also, of course, much more wide than that, because when you look at actually what he's talking about wanting to strengthen their power in the Western Hemisphere, and that is obviously directed at Latin America, but also about the way that this will be against any foreign economic investment or intervention of any kind, any cultural links. All of these things will be the case. It's also very serious for us here in Britain about what it means for Europe, because what's happening is that the other side of this strategic document, where he talks in the most insulting terms about the Western governments, the Western European governments, and praises the idea of far-right patriotic parties coming to power in Western Europe. But he also talks about the way in which Europe has to stand on its own 2 feet militarily. And what we're now seeing is rearmament on a scale not seen since the end of the Second World War, in terms of Germany, in terms of France, in terms of here in Britain. And we've seen this week, we've seen all the things. MI6 now talking about the huge threat of war from Russia. There is not a threat of war from Russia to Britain. There simply isn't a threat. It simply is not the case, but they're building this up. We've had the head of the army this week is telling us that we have to have more civil defence. They're moving towards conscription of young people, as they're already doing in Germany and in France. So I think we have huge issues here. I think the left overall in this country really needs to strengthen what we're doing against war and against the sighting of nuclear weapons that is going on. Trump is not withdrawing from Europe, as he likes to talk about. The American bases will stay, but we will be paying the price, both economically and in terms of our security, from this increase in rearmament. So I think these issues all come together, and I think we have to see them as one real threat from the United States and its allies. And just to conclude, I think that the whole question of the Starmer government and the way in which it appeases Trump all the time is something we have to keep challenging. They do have the Venezuelan goal. They will not support Venezuela against Trump. And we have to demand that they do, but they're not going to do that. And I think everybody's aware of that. But what we also have to say is they have to break from this foreign policy, which has been so disastrous in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya, and now threatens to be even more disastrous in Venezuela and elsewhere in the world. So I think that we're coming to the end of the year. The next year is going to be incredibly dangerous. We have to get organised to make sure we fight for peace, not war. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Lindsey. That was really informative. I think the stuff you've talked about the sort of recruitment into the army and such is something that's coming up from education comrades across Europe, really. So I think it is a really important point and something we all need to be thinking about, because there does seem to be this real push to that as well. But other hugely important points. You're such a knowledgeable person about this, so thank you for giving us your time this evening. Our next speaker is Dáire Hughes. He's a Sinn Féin MP for Newry and Armagh. I just want to say, because I know some of our speakers are having to leave, so I just want to make that point to people that are in the room, because we have got well over 200 people here, which is absolutely fantastic. But our speakers are very busy people, and sometimes they have to disappear to go off and do other things. So if you see people leaving, it genuinely is because they are coming in to do this for us and then are having to disappear off to go to another meeting. So I hope people accept that everybody can't stay with us all of the time. But Dáire, you're very welcome. I look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you, Louise. Jadív, Carja, Falcha, welcome all. Fraternal greetings from all in Sinn Féin and from all Irish people who hold the values of freedom close to our hearts. Garamila Mayagav, thank you for the invitation to take part in this important online rally. As a result of our own history and circumstance, we instinctively empathise with those who have struggled and those who struggle still. The last time I spoke at a Venezuelan Solidarity campaign event, I recalled how we all look forward to a time when solidarity campaigns like this one exist only to support and promote friends internationally and don't have to mobilise under the current circumstances. Regrettably, since then, we've seen a marked escalation in tension, rhetoric, and violent acts against Venezuela, bringing us to the brink of war. US military activities in the Caribbean Sea are a cause for immense and serious concern and are totally unacceptable. Threats of further military incursion against Venezuela equally so. The immense buildup of US military forces in the Caribbean Sea and subsequent assaults against vessels and the killing of innocent civilians has dramatically escalated tensions in the region. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has criticized President Trump's actions as having no justification in international law. This follows the UN Human Rights Council Special Rapporteur's finding that US military acts are violating the fundamental international obligations not to intervene in the domestic affairs or threaten the use of armed force against another country. There needs to be an immediate de-escalation of military tensions in the region. International law and Venezuelan national sovereignty must be upheld by all relevant actors, embracing multilateralism and diplomacy. Political engagement is key to resetting diplomatic relations between the US, Venezuela, the wider Caribbean and Latin American region. This has to be the primary objective of all international and diplomatic efforts. This military adventurism comes as Western sanctions continue to suffocate Venezuela. We stand unshakably in support of the principles of freedom and self-determination. Democratically elected governments in South America and Central America and the Caribbean have the right to pursue the policies in which they were elected, free from outside intervention and internal destabilisation. We and all progressives applaud those whose policies are effectively tackling poverty, inequality, and racism in the region, often in tremendously difficult circumstances, made worse by the economic war being waged through sanction regimes and gross military provocation. Venezuela's current difficulties, like the difficulties faced by other nations worldwide, are best addressed and resolved through peaceful dialogue and constructive international cooperation. Outside interferences and sanctions are starving Venezuela of economic development and harming all Venezuelans. It simply must cease. Imperialism in its old form and the new continues to shape not just the destiny of Venezuela or Latin America, but billions of people globally. From Latin America to Africa, countries in the global south are trapped in a cycle of debt and dependencies, their economies shaped by the demands of foreign powers and Western financial institutions. They and their citizens all too often remain the playthings of Western military interference. We must always be steadfast in our solidarity with the struggles of the Venezuelan people and the struggles of all of those who resist interference, occupation, and colonialism globally. As Hugo Chavez said of the Venezuelan people, we want to be brothers and sisters. We want respect and equality, a balanced world in order to have peace and development. We must stand firm in observing that right to peace, the right to resist, and the right to self-determination for all the peoples of the world. So friends and comrades, we will continue to carry the Venezuelan people in our hearts until our freedom is guaranteed. Goramila Mayogif Valer.
Thank you so much, Dáire. What a powerful speech. And we really appreciate you giving up your time. I know you have other things on this evening, so but that was a very important and very powerful speech. So thank you for giving up time to be with us. And I'm sure everybody will take your words away and think about those. Our next speaker is Carlos Ron, who is from Venezuela. He's the coordinator of Our America for the Tricontinental Institute of Social Research. I know, Carlos, you're very busy, but we really appreciate you giving up time to be with us tonight. It's very important for us to hear from you. So I'm going to hand the floor straight to you because I know you have to be leaving us soon.
Well, thank you very much, Luis, and thank everybody for joining this effort and for always being in solidarity with Venezuela. I am here in Caracas, Venezuela right now, and I come to you with a very fraternal greeting. I want to say that I am a socialist. I have grown under the liberating philosophy of Simón Bolívar and Hugo Chavez. I am also a Marxist, but I'm not here right now to defend Venezuela on ideological terms. I voted for President Maduro, but I think we're past this. I think now we're talking about the war that U.S. imperialism is attempting against Venezuela and against all of South America. And I've been to several of these gatherings, and I don't want people to think that this is business as usual or this is hostility as usual. There's an ongoing attempt to destroy the lives of the Venezuelan people. And I want to make sure that I can transmit that. You know, we can't talk about war now just in the terms of what a conventional war used to be. We have to talk about what a hybrid war is. And it's not just about a land invasion, it's what has already been going on against Venezuela for over 26 years. And that now we're seeing a very fast and dangerous escalation. But there are several crimes against humanity being committed, several acts of war being committed against Venezuela. There are over 1,000 legal coercive measures against my country. We would never know exactly how many lives have been lost because of the capability of the state to tend to the basic necessities of its people are being sabotaged constantly by the United States. Right now, in the last 20 weeks or so, there are almost 90 people have been murdered. And I say this very clearly and responsibly. They have been murdered by the United States government, either in the Caribbean, mostly in the Caribbean, some in the Pacific Ocean as well. And they're using this idea that this is a struggle against drug trafficking, when we know that the target, if anybody was really targeting drug trafficking, they would be aiming somewhere else. But these are people, 90 people at least, whose lives have been lost already in this war. They're spending nearly $200 million a day in terrorizing the Caribbean Sea. And meanwhile, over 40 million people in the United States are in the state of poverty, and they have no access to healthcare, to education, to things that their country should be spending on instead of terrorizing our people. This is terror also being applied to the people in the United States. Meanwhile, there is a woman out there who was irresponsibly given the Nobel Peace Prize. She calls on an invasion to her own country. She applauds Trump sending migrants from her own country to concentration camps set up by Trump, by Marco Rubio, and by Nayib Bukele in El Salvador. She has said publicly that over 60% of her fellow countrymen and women are involved in drug trafficking, so an attack can take place. And we have to say this clearly. She is not a person of peace. She's the Shalabi of Venezuela and wants her country to turn into another Iraq. About 2 days ago, an airline flight from JetBlue, flying from Curacao, almost collided in midair with a U.S. warplane that had its transponder off. And because they're doing these illegal flights around the region, they're doing sabotage flights, and this almost led to a crash, a midair crash. They saved themselves for about 5 miles from coming into collision. This is insanity. This is irresponsible. This is a violation of international law. And now I have to talk about piracy. Over 1 million barrels of oil in a tanker were taken from Venezuela illegally by the United States, and then they issued more sanctions on ships. So now what we're going to see is their attempt to stop any type of Venezuelan shipment from taking place. This is fatal for the Venezuelan people. Everybody knows this is our main source of income. This is what the state has as its resource. This is a huge crime against the people, all of the people of Venezuela. Today, the Venezuelan government and PDVSA, our national oil company, denounced that the company suffered a cyber attack. The cyber attack is coming from these warplanes that have the technology to do these kind of things. Today, we also find out that Trinidad and Tobago, another sister country from the region, helped the United States into this illegal seizure of the shipping. When we see these governments that are now turning to the right, are now cooperating with aggression against Venezuela, this is a very sad day for us, because you could see the dismantling of regional unity, of regional integration, and for the regional aspiration that we all have to live together and move forward as a region and develop together as a region. So my friends, this is a very dangerous time. And what I want to transmit to you from Caracas is the sense of urgency. I'm not speaking to you as if we're under panic or we're afraid. We know what we're facing. We're not naive. We know what is out there. But we're also very resilient, and we're going to continue to maintain our position very firmly. But make sure that you understand that everybody that you come into contact understands this is not about drugs. This is not about weapons of mass destruction or any of these fantasies that the U.S. often invents to attack people. This is not even about an anti-U.S. feeling. This is not about a cartel, and this by no means is tension between two countries. Because sometimes you read that, the countries are in tension or the differences. There is no differences. We are under attack. This is a one-sided attack. This is a one-sided aggression. We have never done anything against the United States. We are a country, though, that has the largest oil reserves in the world. We have dared to call ourselves independent and socialist. And we are standing against imperialism and against fascism in this part of the world. If we lose Venezuela, we will lose regional integration, we will lose independence, and humanity will not be able to stand against fascism, at least in this part of South America. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Carlos. So important to hear from you there on the ground about the situation. So I know you are extremely busy. I really appreciate you giving us your time this evening. That was a very powerful message to all of us and a call to all of us about what we need to be doing going forward. So thank you. I'm going to call in Fraser Maguire. Many of you will know Fraser. He's just going to talk a little bit about Venezuela Solidarity Campaign and what you need to do to get more involved. So I'll hand over to you, Fraser.
Thank you very much, and what a great contribution there from Carlos. So my name's Fraser Maguire. I'm the chair of TUC Workers and an organizer with Unite Hospitality, but I'm also an EC member on the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. And especially in recent months, I've been involved in stepping up our organizing in youth and student groups, putting on film screenings, educational events. We've seen an incredible increase in youth and student activity, especially around Palestine and the genocide in the past 2 years, and being able to convert this energy and this education in sort of wider anti-imperialist understanding among young people is absolutely crucial. And with an event like this, which is so important, I can't not touch on the action points. And some of these will be posted in the link on whatever platform you're watching. We've got a statement opposing Trump's war on Venezuela, which has already been backed by thousands of people, including MPs, Lords, the General Secretaries of 8 trade unions, and leading peace organisations, including the CND, Stop the War, and solidarity organisations like the Peace and Justice Project. We do want to get the word out as much as possible. So there has to be tremendous opposition in the UK to the drive to war, so we can put maximum pressure on the government. Please sign this if you haven't already, and encourage your friends and your family to sign. The VSC also urgently needs resources to build this opposition to the coming possibility of war with Venezuela and the escalation and aggression that we're seeing from Trump in America. We've already rapidly expanded our work in recent months and especially recent weeks, but we are going to continue to need funds, we're going to need boots on the ground, and we're going to need all that support. Please consider joining the VSC, taking a motion or a request for a donation or funding to your trade union branch or organisation, or even making a donation yourself. And again, the link to this will be in the chat. You can also register for our next event, which will take place on Monday, the 19th of July, and that will be an international forum opposing Trump's war on Venezuela, with some of the fantastic speakers we've already had tonight, including Jeremy Corbyn, and speakers such as Vijay Prashad and Tariq Ali as well as voices from around the world and the global south in solidarity with Venezuela. You can also follow us on social media. I mean, I think if we've seen anything over the last 2 years, it's how important of a role social media can play in getting the word out, in building solidarity actions, including engaging people who might be new to the wider solidarity and labour movement in the UK. And these are going to be some of the most crucial people to reach as Trump's aggression increases and as we preempt a possible war with education, and by building sort of disciplined organisation in this country is going to be absolutely crucial. So I'll give one final appeal. Please do donate anything you can and encourage your trade union branch, trades council, organisation to support as well. Thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Fraser. Very important points. There's loads of actions there from Fraser that you need to take part in. But do take this up within your trade union. Do make sure you check the chat before you leave. We've got over 200 people here, so we've got plenty of opportunity for sharing what we are doing. Okay, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Sophie Bolt. She's the General Secretary of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament. Great to see you here, Sophie. I'm going to hand straight over to you.
Thanks so much, Louise, and it's a real pleasure to be with all of you here today. Massively important event that's been organised, and also it's a real privilege. I mean, CND has been, sort of standing in solidarity with the Latin American movement for a very, very long time now, because we understand how critical that part of the world is and what a beacon of hope it continues to be. So we totally condemn Trump's illegal actions against Venezuela and Latin America. This, we know full well this is nothing about drug trafficking. The UN has made clear that these attacks on fishing boats violate international law and amount to extrajudicial killings. And the seizure of the Venezuelan oil tanker in international waters is yet another violation. The terrifying military buildup by the US is about threatening war against the populations of Venezuela and the wider Latin American continent. And the scale and destructive power of this weaponry is immense, including, nuclear capable B-52 long-range bombers that have already been making lots and lots of flights from the US to the Venezuelan coast. But we know that this is not just a threat against the Venezuelan population, as I say, but it's against the whole of Latin America. If Trump succeeds in carrying out a military intervention in Venezuela and removes the democratically elected Maduro, he will try to do it across the region. And this has been made absolutely explicit in Trump's national security strategy, which was published early in December. It states that the US needs to restore its preeminence in the Western Hemisphere so that the US can assert ourselves confidently where and when we need to in the region. So this means attempting to overthrow political leaders in Latin America who won't open up their country's wealth to the US again. And we know that Venezuela has the largest oil reserves in the world, oil reserves that the US has not been able to exploit since President Chavez nationalized the Venezuelan oil industry nearly 20 years ago. We know that Trump's strategy aims to install regimes that will work to strengthen our security partnership, from weapons sales to intelligence sharing to joint exercises. So he wants to turn Latin America into a military alliance to fight his global war to maintain US dominance. And the result of this will, of course, be absolutely horrific. We've seen the devastating consequences of US intervention before, and US sanctions against Venezuela alone has killed over 40,000 people. And globally, this would also be absolutely catastrophic. We know that we're in a real, very, very dangerous time, and there's a real threat of a third world war that could go nuclear. And what Trump is trying to do is trying to use Latin America in that global war. But the people of Venezuela and Latin America have the right to live in peace, to control their own resources, to trade with who they want, and to determine their own future. Many Latin American countries offer us, as I say, a real beacon of hope. Venezuela has consistently opposed Israel's genocide, the defining struggle today. And Brazil's Lula is again protecting the Amazon rainforest, our climate's lifeline. So this is about peace and sovereignty, but is also about the world we need. We must pressure the British government to oppose any military intervention and refuse the use of any British bases. And ultimately, it's absolutely critical that we all stand together to say no to Trump's war on Venezuela and solidarity with Latin America. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Sophie, and thanks for all you continue to do to campaign for peace globally. It's great to work with you. Okay, we are slightly over time, so I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Bernard Regan is the National Secretary of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign. Many of you will know him for his work he's done over decades campaigning for justice, not just in Latin America, but across the world, and particularly in Palestine as well. So we're really pleased to have you here, Bernard. You're very welcome. I'll hand you the floor.
Thank you very much, Louise. And many of the speakers have covered points that I wish to make, so I'll try and introduce some other issues that I think are relevant. Firstly, to say that on behalf of the Cuba Solidarity Campaign, we were more than willing to sign the statement produced by the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. We recognize that this threat that is being made and actions that are being taken by the United States government represent a threat to the whole of the Caribbean, to Cuba, and indeed have global implications. As Sophie has just said, it is a matter of concern internationally. The position in relation to the alleged war against drugs, I just want to make a comment on that. Cuba has for many decades actually had a relationship with the United States intercepting drugs trafficking in the Caribbean area. What is interesting to me is that just on the 4th of December, just a few days before this intervention against the oil carrier was made, the United States rescinded that agreement. So the idea that they have a serious commitment to intercepting drugs trafficking between Latin America and the north of the United States is just fallacious. It's just completely untrue. What we've seen from Trump, both in his first term of office and now, is an absolute firm declaration that the Monroe Doctrine represents the basis for the policies that the United States has for the whole of the Western Hemisphere. And the document that people have been referring to, that is the National Security Strategy of the United States of America, which was published just in November, spells out what that means. And we've already heard him talk about things like changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, talking about controlling the Panama Canal, and even talking about Greenland and Canada and so on. So he has these expansionist views, but they're from the point of American capital interest, the interest of big business in the United States. And it's been spelt out by various people. Laura Richardson, who was the general in charge of the United States Southern Command in 2023, declared this before a congressional committee. Alvin Halsey, the admiral who succeeded her after she retired, said exactly the same. It's an economic strategy that is put together. It's a marrying of not only of the White House policy, not only of the Pentagon, but also Wall Street that we're seeing enacted here in order to rob the resources that should be used by the peoples of Latin America in the interests of the peoples of Latin America. And that's what he says in relation to this strategy document, because it has sections on the Western Hemisphere, it has sections on Asia, it has sections on Africa, it has sections on Europe. It's a completely comprehensive perspective in terms of how the United States sees the world and what they are about in relation to this. Next year will be the 100th anniversary of the birth of Fidel Castro. And Fidel said in 1962 on the Second Declaration of Havana, he made an interesting point, and I think it's pertinent to what has been happening in Venezuela and the changes that has been brought about by Hugo Chavez and succeeded by President Maduro. And Fidel said, what is hidden behind the Yankees' hate of the Cuban Revolution? He asked the question. And he went on to say, what explains it is fear, not fear of the Cuban Revolution, but fear of the Latin American Revolution. And I think that is what is the case, that the peoples of Latin America have a right to use the resources of their continent in the interests of the peoples of that world. And that is what the United States is concerned about. But it wants to dominate, it wants to control, it wants to take all of those wealth for the interests of US capital. So this is not just about Venezuela. It is principally and initially critically about Venezuela. It's about Cuba, which has faced a blockade for more than 60 years and faces the most harsh regime of punishment in terms of economics and in terms of the way in which the US acts towards it. But it is also about the whole of the Western Hemisphere. Indeed, as I've said, it's a global issue. And it's an issue also in relation to the British government, which has tail-ended Trump, in my view, in almost every international policy that the US has expressed an opinion on and has acted on, and is not differentiated. And as people have referenced, there's Venezuelan gold, which is held. There's the blockade against Cuba, which the British government casts a vote against in the UN, but does nothing in terms of actually helping to break that blockade against Cuba, which is one of the most vicious and continuous that has been seen internationally. So I want to express solidarity with the people of Venezuela, with the work of the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign for unity amongst all of the peoples of Latin America and globally of those fighting for the right of people for self-determination and the right of people to defend their sovereignty. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Bernard. Very informative, as always, so much in such a short space of time. And I would encourage everybody to read the document that Bernard referred to. It's very interesting read, so people should certainly have a look at that. Okay, our next speaker, unfortunately, I don't think has arrived, but we have got a statement from her, which someone is going to read out. So she is the General Secretary of the TSSA, Maryam Eslamdoust, but unfortunately she was travelling and wasn't sure she could get here. So I'm going to hand over, we're going to read out her statement, and then we will move to our final speaker.
Hi everyone, I'm Lee from the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign Executive, and I'm reading out the statement from Maryam, the General Secretary of the TSSA Union. She says, I stand against the imperialist attacks and threats being made against Venezuela by the United States. This has nothing to do with democracy or human rights. It's about oil. Venezuela is tar-rich oil that the US wants, and history shows us exactly what happens when powerful countries decide someone else's resources belong to them. This is about greed, it's about power, it's about theft and aggression, all dressed up as a foreign policy. When one country is allowed to violate another's sovereignty for profit, it puts every sovereign nation at risk. No state is safe if this kind of behavior is tolerated. That's why all countries, especially those who claim to value international law, need to speak out. We've already watched the destruction of Gaza happen in real time, with aggression being excused, justified, or ignored. That silence sent a message. It told powerful governments they could act without consequences. And now that same logic is being used again. This isn't just a threat to Venezuela, it's a threat to everybody's right to self-determination. So I stand in solidarity with Venezuela because imperialism anywhere endangers sovereignty everywhere. And if we don't push back, we're all next.
Thanks very much. And thanks to Maryam for taking time to write a statement to send in. I know she is extremely busy, as many General Secretaries are at the moment. So we're going to move on to our final speaker. I would just say, because I know a few people have left, there are lots of links that have been posted in the chat, but these will be sent out to you after the meeting. So don't worry if you haven't clicked on all of them. We will be following up to make sure we share with you the things we want you to do. But our final speaker is Francesco Dominguez from the Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. He's the National Secretary. I'm sure, sorry, I've got a bit of a cold. I'm sure he needs no introduction at all, but you're very welcome, and I'll hand the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Luis, and fantastic meeting, and fantastic, amount of support from so many important organizations and MPs and so on. We need this very much. I'm just going to concentrate on one thing, which is this. If you look at the number of boats that have been blown up in the, by the war fleet, 10 of them have been blown up in the coast of Venezuela, 7 in the coast of Colombia, and 3 in the coast of Mexico. I think these are clear warnings. Trump has been very clear that he is going to identify land targets. And these are the 3 countries that actually want to start the whole operation with to assert the hegemony of the United States according to that document. These not only risks, if Trump gets away with it, not only risks regional conflict plus huge amount of problems, but on top of that, if the United States gets away with it, then what the United States will do, recolonize these countries. They will turn into total protectors by the United States. They will not be able to do anything. They will not be able to trade with anybody outside the decisions of the United States. They will not be able to take sovereign decisions regarding anything and everything. And this is really what it's about in terms of the document of the security strategy that they produce. Now, what would that mean? I think we have in the history of Latin America, in the recent history of Latin America, we have evidence of what will happen. When the coup took place in Chile in 1973, which inaugurated neoliberalism in the region, in the world, the military dictatorship in Chile assassinated 5,000 people in 17 years. There was a coup d'etat next door in Argentina that took place in 1976. In 6 years in Argentina, the military assassinated 32,000 people. When Nicaragua had the audacity to actually overthrow a US-sponsored dictator, the United States waged a proxy war against this country, which meant the killing of 50,000 people. When the Salvadorians trying to assert their sovereignty by struggling very hard between 1980 and 1990, the United States organized assassination of 80,000 people. And next door in Guatemala, exactly in the same decade, the number of people assassinated was 120,000. Now think about it. What the United States and the extreme right wing in Venezuela will do to purge that country of Chavistas. How many are there? Not tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, millions. So the carnage that I just described is going to pale into insignificance when and if the United States gets away with it. Now, this brings me on to the following point. Given that what is at stake is so horrific, it is not difficult to support opposing the war. And you can see this already in the United States. I've seen on national television in the United States, retired generals, one after another, opposing the war, saying the United States doesn't have any authority, Trump doesn't have any authority to actually conduct the war that he's conducted against the Caribbean. Let me give you one example. Retired General Barry McCaffrey, director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy between 1996 and 2001, in an interview on the 5th of December said the following: the US war fleet deployed in the Caribbean Sea cannot have any significant impact on cocaine production, most of which comes out of Colombia. It is not a force that has any validity to a law enforcement operation. He finished with this: we got to direct our attention towards the threat facing the United States, a lawless president. It's coming from the absolutely core of the establishment in the United States. Even better, House Representative Jim McGovern, Democrat, together with Joaquin Castro, Democrat, are together in an initiative with Thomas Massie, Republican, Don Bacon, and wait for it, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are putting forward a bill to the Congress to stop to block Trump's unauthorized war on Venezuela. So on top of all of that, 70% of the population in the United States are going to oppose the war, and 91% of the Venezuelans actually oppose and have an unfavorable view of Maria Corina Machado, who is supporting the invasion and the war against Venezuela. So it's not difficult to support. I'm addressing my remarks to mainly MPs, but not exclusively. You can do it. If people in the United States establishment at the level of describing have done it, you can do it. We need more solidarity. So sign the statement and demand that the UK government to explicitly oppose Trump's war on Venezuela. I'll finish with this. No war on Venezuela and Latin America. No war for oil. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was a fantastic end to this. I mean, I think this has been a really powerful meeting. I hope people have felt that. We've had over 200 people here with us, listening to this, listening to our speakers. There are loads and loads of actions in the chat that people are, encouraged to take part in. but these will be sent to everybody that registered. I want to give a final thank you to all of our speakers who I think have been absolutely fantastic, very clear, very powerful. This is a really important time for us, and we have to think about what we do going forward. So we need to engage and make sure you're a member of Venezuela Solidarity Campaign so you can keep up to date with all of our actions. And finally, I would encourage everybody that is in a trade union here on the call, please make sure you take this up within your trade union. Make sure they're affiliated to Venezuela Solidarity Campaign. Encourage people to get speakers along to learn about what is happening. So thank you again to all of our fantastic speakers. Thank you to Venezuela Solidarity Campaign for organising such a powerful and important event. And thank you to all of you for giving up your evening. And we will be in touch. We will be asking for your continued support. Thank you, everyone.